Mexico, and our actuary, Carlos Contreras. And also, we have another co-worker who will help us out to comment, who is Daniela Alejandra Gonzalez. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. And now we have the simultaneous interpretation service right now available. So please just choose the language that you prefer in the bottom part of the screen. So either Spanish, English, or Portuguese. Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome, Mr. General Secretary. Thank you very much, Ms. Vanessa. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. First of all, I would like to give you my greetings. And on behalf of the President of the Inter-American Conference for Social Security, Mr. Zoe Aburto, who is also the Director of the Mexican Institute of Social Security. So, and also I will share this table with all these officials. Thank you very much for the great efforts to make this 47th session of the permanent seminar on the welfare in the Americas possible. We wanted to mention that besides contributing to the development of social security in the Americas, on the preparation of different declarations, recommendations on this regard, and also to improve the cooperation and exchange of different experiences, and just to promote the training and education, professional education of the employees on the Social Security institutions in the American continent. Since we are developing this through the Inter-American Center for Social Security Studies, which is the international body that has the aim to disseminate and just to promote all the progress and studies on social security. And with the aim of this permanent seminar, which is established in the Americas for more than 4 years, we look to materialize this objective by promoting the research in terms of social security and the exchange of different experiences and ideas. So this session is really special because today we will present you with the results of a research that was done by Mr. Carlos Velez, who already works in the CISS. And actually, this is the first time of Mr. Velez that is here with us in this session. And actually, in April 2021, he presented his results of his PhD process. Thank you very much, and we are very grateful to having you today again. Thank you very much. So in this study that it will be presented by Mr. Velez, centered in a most developed social security approaches. And actually this doesn't have a great interest in the rest of the Americas. And I refer to the pension topic and also for the aging. By exchanging different microdata and social security information, they can talk about the probabilities in which the population or the elderly population in Mexico can access to a pension due to the old age. And actually, they provide us with a very interesting results. And this is why Mr. Carlos Velez will talk about this later on. And actually, we have a great panel today, and I will pass the floor to Mr. Carlos and to other panelists. So I will only want to conclude to invite you all to present your proposals or your research proposals or your results on the different analysis and works that you are being developing in your professional career or background. Thank you very much, everyone. And again, thank you very much and welcome to this session. Thank you very much, Mr. General Secretary. Now, I am pleased to give the floor to Mr. Emilio Carrasco, who is the Director of Inter-American Center for Social Security Studies. It's a pleasure, and I'm very happy to be here in this seminar. Thank you very much for this participation. Thank you very much, Ms. Vanessa, and good morning, everyone, for those that are joining us remotely and here on site. My intervention is really short because I think that the challenge actually is part of the presentation of the work of Carlos. The work presented by Carlos Alejandro Vélez today in this 47 Permanent Seminar on Welfare in the Americas is an outstanding example of the possible relationship between academic institutions and international organizations such as the CISS and the CISS in order to strengthen and consolidate research in the field of social security in the region. The subject of his research focused on the relationship between labor trajectories and pensions and contributes to the methodological empirical discussion on this topic. In this sense, it presents an innovative technique for studying labor markets and pensions in Mexico. However, the challenge is to continue replicating this type of model of the rest of the countries in the Americas. It is important to highlight that the presentation of Carlos Alejandro Vélez, who is now part of the CISS research team, and the incorporation of Carlos facilitates links with the National Autonomous University of Mexico and other research centers. To this end, the center is working on a project to structure a network of universities in the Americas where research and training programs in the field of Social Security are being carried out. And finally, it should be noted that the article that will be discussed below has been accepted for presentation at the Latin America Population Congress in Bogota, Colombia. And with this type of work, the CISS and the CISS gain visibility in the Americas because they are also presented in the different processes that are being faced in the Americas. Thank you very much. All the success for you, Mr. Carlos. Thank you very much, Mr. Carrasco. And now we will have the presentation by Mr. Carlos Echegaray on a document. First of all, I would like just to read his CV. He is Master in Economy from the Guanajuato University, and the university also for National University of Mexico. He had studied by the Colegio de Mexico. In his PhD, he made a research instance in Spain. Likewise, he worked in public policies in the state of Guanajuato in Mexico, and is as a senior master's in Spain. And also he has been working for the Worldwide Bank for the CISS and the government of Nayarit. He is currently the specialist researcher in infographics in the Inter-American Center for Social Security, and he works in the aging population in Mexico on pensions as a mechanism of economics and with the UNAM. Lastly, he has 4 scientific publications, different participations in congresses, and also for the Data Science Congress applicable for the economics in Spain in 2021. So I will give the floor to Mr. Carlos. Thank you very much. Okay, before we begin, I want to thank the CISS, Vanessa, Mr. Emilio Carrasco, and all the commentarists that allow me or give me this space to present my paper. Okay, so let's get started with the presentation. Okay, in the meantime, my presentation has to do with the methodological proposal on the different methodologies. And this kind of methodologies allow us to apply different methodologies to longitudinal data. So we have a person in a period, and this person gives follow-up through the years. I don't know, mainly 5 years later, and then he is going to be interviewed again. So it has to do with all the experience that all people have been received along their life. And we want to try to explain the methodological aspects in this sense. So actually, now for the NACEN in Mexico, this type of models can be replicated in different surveys. So in Latin America, for example, in Costa Rica, with longitudinal studies in Uruguay, in Colombia, and so on, or in Chile. So this type of models can be replicated for each of the regions. So if you want me, I can just get started. Okay, give us just a minute. We will share your presentation with the audience. Give us just a minute.
Estamos intentando proyectar. Ahí está. ¿Me pueden poner en modo presentación, por favor? Gracias. Creo que ya.
Okay, we are ready now. All right, thank you very much. So I will get started with this presentation with a brief description of the patients and observer experience, just trying to conceptualize what is the main importance of this topic. And then later on, we will see about certain concepts, and we will try to talk about the application of the model, and then we will talk about the multimonial logistic model just to know the pertinence possibilities of each of one. So I will just provide you with a general concept of the pensions. So the origin of the pension systems is more than 200 years old in Persia in 1881. So just to try to avoid all these issues, we wanted to incorporate the Social Security. Some concepts that we have to talk about in this is Social Security and the pensions. And actually, the first concept is a temporal inconsistency. With this concept, we seek to guarantee safety to people because they are not always will have the same revenue along their life. So, of course, if you may recall, their lifetime or economical lifetime of people, while they are having some experience, they gaining more experience and more income. So just to avoid this problem, actually the pensions arise to guarantee that with people in the elderly age can have another income. So of course, in this case, the elderly people, when people are getting older, they get different degenerative illnesses or some other consequences that make them complex just for people to continue working and just for their continuity in the labor market. And later, to try to protect the population with lower incomes and who do not have the ability to save, because when they get retired, they can apply the different mechanisms or the pensions. We can just look for certain possibilities for them to be retired. So during the pension history, we have different schemes. Now I will try to provide you with three contributory pensions or three types of pensions, which is a pay-as-you-go, fully funded, non-contributory pensions. So people that are now retired, this budget has been financed by all people that are already in the work environment. So they are just trying to work in the pension schemes, and those people that are already retired, they have to leverage this with their own income. So if you may recall our population pyramids, we can see here that the proportion of elderly people is higher in comparison with the population that is still working. So due to these problems for the old age population, we have to compare different schemes for the fully funded possibilities. And this is when the people provide or promote things for payment for their own retirement. And of course, there are some other countries that have huge rates of natality. And these work environments are not stable. So those people that are retired from the labor market don't have the possibility to provide the contributions themselves. there are some other non-contributory pensions, which are the ones that in which the government provide a minimum income, and there is no mechanism that guarantees financial sustainability, and they represent a high public spending. Now, we have a general characteristics just to contextualize the pensions, and with this regard, I want just to highlight two options. So let's just remember that this topic is a main argument for the non-contributory pensions, just to be part of the income of people. What you can see here in the left chart is the fecundity or current birth rate. This birth rate has diminished over the time, and actually, in certain topics, has been replaced. So, less than 2 children per woman. And something that we also have seen here is the current death rate. So I actually want to talk about the behavior of the current death rate, because actually these concepts have made people to live more. And every time that we face diseases or some other circumstances, this population has diminished. So how you can observe here is that they continue descending, and we expect that it can increase in the future. And why? And of course, due to this population aging, we will have more older people in the future. And of course, it will increase the death rate. For example, the COVID-19, as we have to face a lot of deaths. However, in the other hand, we have the other chart on the right, and this is very related to the I fall with a mortality. So we are seeing here that many people tend to live more for the following years. So the fecundity rate is diminishing, and the life expectancy is increasing. So this is originated that the population structure is been changing, and we will have a greater proportion of elderly people here in our societies. Next slide, please. So all these factors can be reflected in the chart in your left, and the projections of Mexican population. So what we can see here in the yellow line is the population over 60 years. So this information comes from the UN, and the population over 60 years, this will be the majority population after 2050. So every time we will have lower proportion of people in the working age. And actually, these people that are working, they are paying the different taxes, so they have just to make some other resources. So if you're just visualizing this and you want just to review this in more strict way, in actually, we have the relationship between people in 15 years for the people that are in the academic background for over 60 years or more. And this population is expected to be the population that are outside the activity, and we will be divided into the population that is part of the work environment, which is the people around 65 years and 15 years. So what we can see here is that we have greater proportion of people or dependent people in the first years. So actually we have a higher point, and then we have diminished point for people. So 2 years ago, when this old population started, we can see here that it stopped. So just to provide you some context, actually the elder people system, we have three wages. So we have the population in working age, and then we have the population or elderly population. So we have this behavior that can be divided into three stages. So what is happening here is that actually we are having some other proportions or higher proportion in the elderly people. And then we can say that, okay, how this been behaving if we only consider a population over 65 years old? So this indicator was done simultaneously, but this is considered only the population over 65 years. So every time the elderly people will be increasing in consideration for the people that are still working. So in 2005, we have around more than 1 million people for each of one inhabitants and the age of working. For 2023, we hope to have more than 140 people for each one person, and this indicator continues growing. So now the chart in the right is a replicate of a research that I have already done, and we only going to consider the economic dependency index. So all people that are not occupied and people that are occupied. Actually, we have here a great difference. So around 80 people that are not employed against the people that are employed. So if we consider those population that provide for the social security systems in some other conditions. So this is the great importance of the study of the population in relationship to this aging, population aging. Some other of the arguments that we have been discussed to study the populations, we all know that most of the people are getting older, but what is happening with the pensions? So this has been diminishing. In this sense, as you may see here in the chart in the right part, this is the pension spending. We can see here that the expense in pension has been increasing a lot in the last years, and it has to do with the aging of the population for both the contributory and contributory stages have been increasing. And nowadays, we estimate that this pension expense is around the 50%. You can see it in the chart on the right. Next slide, please. And finally, just to provide you the context on how we can be able to study these topics, there is something that is very important. And this aspect was treated in some last research has been very important to address in the transitions in the different schemes of pensions. And this is a transitional generation. So when we have a contributory system, pension system, in which people working provide or pay for the benefits and also covers a group of pensioners that is already retired, we have the relationship between two active people or non-active people. So we have here the people that pay. However, when we change into a more individual capitalization system, we can see here is that there is a generation that will exist at the same time with the both schemes of pensions for the pay-as-you-go and the individual capitalization scheme. So of course, this will might have a consequence because while you are working, they will adopt, of course, they have to pay for certain taxes directly or not to the population that is already retired or for the pensioners, but at the same time, they have to save for their retirement. So they will have two loads that is really high for this generation. So due to this, in certain documentations, they mention that this transitional generation should be studied in depth to avoid them to be unprotected. And this is only just to provide you the importance how these systems work on. However, I want you to explain that actually we all know that the population is getting older and the pension system has been adapting constantly. However, how can we just study this type of topics? And there are different methods to be applicable. So I have applied a model, a computational model, and this model allows us to use great number of information. Specifically, I address the analysis of sequence. And this sequence analysis come for the ADN channels for the DNA. And actually, this same model can be taken to the social sciences. And actually, we have an ordered sets of things and events. So we will have here, for example, a person in the same state, they are employed in the second state, they are unemployed, and the third state, they are not employed. So we have three patterns. So we have to define them, the states and the time. So we have these ordered sets of things, and we can continue with the sequence. And just to create this event, we have to define different concepts of these events. First of all, if they can be repeated or not. So for example, a person can be employed or not employed and just to be part of employed. So in this case, we have different elements that can be repeated. And there are some other circumstances that cannot be repeated. So a person is pensioned or can be retired. They are in the process of their retirement. However, we can see here that it can be considered as well. So in the following slides, we will see how can we define the variables. And what we can see here, actually, this is a trajectory from T moment in which the person has a state, either just to be part of a company. Then they will have another state, for example, just to be in the university admission. Then they can be employed. So actually, the states can mix together. So a person can be studying the university and working at the same time. So the events can be repeated or they can be changed. So the next step is employment, and then they can buy a house. So actually, this is only a trajectory, and we have different types of trajectories. So now this is the sequence analysis, and within this model, we have different models, and I choose the most common one, which is called optimal matching. And this is a part of the molecular biologist for the analysis of the protein and DNA sequence. And with this model, we will try to mix people that are similar. So around 1,500 million of data, and actually we have to mix or match similar trajectories. Now, some other characteristic of this model, just to mix these trajectories, is they should have the same period of observation. So we cannot mix a person that belongs to the 1970 law and they live the work environment in 1980. Or maybe we have another person that started working in 2010. Of course, they are not equal. So we will have to make some different trajectories that can be comparable. And for this, I use different conditions. First of all, just to create these trajectories or these concepts, is just to define an alphabet. So I mean just to define the states that I will using. So first of all, we have to choose the duration of element if it's relevant or not, or the interval assignment. So I will use the years, either a person from 85 years, 65 years. So all the intervals should be the same for all people. And at the end, you will have this type of database of this type. So for example, a person that is 55 years old and is state number 1, state number 2, and then they have to change for the 65 years, they have to keep in the same stage or they will be changing. Now, the NASEM 2021 is a survey existing in Mexico City, and the aim here just to study the population over 65 years old. And this NASEM comprises, or created in 2021, is made up of more than 15,257 people. And actually, all these surveys will have an expansion factor. I mean that these people will represent a X number of people, depending on the state. So even though I have 15,257 people, this person is representative. And at the end, I will have around 1,500,000 people. Now, the database of INASEM is defined for individual and the household. What I have to do here is just to mix all surveys to make a merge. And because I want just to observe the variables individually and in the household. And why? Because the questions of pensions are made in the household. Because all these questions of the person, okay, your spouse has the right for a pension. So these questions are made in a household. However, there are some other demographic differences that can be matching with this. So now what I want is observing here. What I wanted to observe here is just to analyze the labor trajectories that people had from 55 years to 74 years old, because this is the age in which the great majority of people return from the labor market. However, there is a key element here. So we have to observe both intervals. Therefore, the population around 75 and 99 years old will prone here, because people of 75, 99 years old will not be able to review the trajectory from 76 and 98. So for example, these people are 70 years old. They will give us information from 65 and 79 years old. And actually, I cannot just review the 40 years. So I have just to observe the great trajectory, and I will just take the people for 60 years old to 99 years old. So once I just finish this evaluation, so those lost values wouldn't be considered. So there are not complete trajectories. So actually, if there are some people that cannot answer these questions, I just eliminate these values, and then I just have to eliminate all those things that are not useful. And once I have these trajectories, I just have to create a optimal matching model from 1986 to mix them. And then I made a multimodal model to estimate the probabilities. And what are the main states that I will observe? So a person can be either in the activity, so they are being working still, or non-activity. What is the difference between activity and non-activity? Just to remember this about concept, the activity or non-activity is a person that declared that they are not working, but they have not been retired, or because they just take some years, or they have not declared that have not leaving the labor market. So in this case, the person had declared that they are not part of the labor market without a right for the pension. And the person declared that in their household, they have a pension. And here I have an example on how a trajectory looks like. This hypothetical person has 55 years old, and if you observe the labor trajectory until 75 years. So you can see here that the person is still in the T trajectory, working in the 55 years old, 57, 58, so on until the 65 years old. In the 60 years old, they retire from the labor market. They leave from the labor market. So in this case, the state changed to R. And then in the 67 years, they get retired. So they change from the state R to a state P, which is pension. So this is only a typical example on how the trajectory looks like in the labor market. So I will try to explain this methodology. So let's estimate the cost of the institution. I mean, what is the cost just to be part of a state to another state, from a state T and the state R? So just to estimate this cost of the institution, what will be apply here is this formulation. So what is the probability that a person can have the state T since they are in state P? So what would be the probability just to come from TR to change P, etc., etc. So once I estimate the substitution by using this methodology, I will have an Intel cost of 2. So the methodology says that they have to take the half of this Intel cost by the substitution is equal 1. And once I have my Intel cost, I will group the trajectories. So those trajectories that are similar. So for that, we use the matrix of Levenshtein. This is something that is in function that will gather the similarities between those trajectories and the cost that I just estimated. For example, imagine that we have a person, and this person walk 2 steps in front and then 1 step on the right. So they takes one step to the front and one to the left. And we have a third person that walks a half a step and then a half of step to the right. So we just add this information in the model. So both the two people that walk to the right, to the left, are in part of some other group. And actually, this was part of 500,000 of people. And just to make this group, we did recursive methods in which they have to consider the minimum observed according to the things that we have already observed previously. And then we have two groups. So I want to guarantee that these clusters or groups that I'm creating be the similar from with each other. And for this, if we don't have some other methodologies, we have to use some of these methodologies just to have this comparison and just to know how these are similar. And the two groups that describe this population are the four clusters that where I was studying. And once we have this model, we have to review the labor trajectories or the work trajectories. So in this case, how are they distributed from people from 55 to 75 years old before to be pensioned? How are they behaving? So in the green color, we have all people that belong to the activity. So now in the purple color, the ones that are not in activity, and the yellow color, the ones that are already retired, and in gray, all those people that are already retired or they receive a pension. So of course, the probabilities come from 0 to 1. So when people are 55 years old, there is a probability of higher of 0.5, so they can continue working or in the activity. There are some percentage of population around 50% or 40% that are into the non-activity category. So with this survey, will give us a lot of information because we will be able to find the people that are working in Mexico that is around the 60%. And actually, we can observe this in each of the groups of population. So according they getting older, the pension percentage is higher. And one of the advantages of this model is that they can provide us the story or a story of the people. So if we have the story of each of the state in function based on NSM, they mentioned that a 55 years old person will work for 10 to 11 years. Then they will spend 4 years in non-activity and 1 year in retirement before their household can access a pension. So in Mexico, this will be described in general terms. So what are the main results of this grouping? Of course, we have 4 charts by following the methodology. And this grouping that most describes the population in Mexico around 55 years or over. So the way we're going to see it is that this group is characterized that they will still working. So this group in the left side is around the 50% of the population that belongs to this group. And then we have the bottom part, the upper part of the right, which is the people that are active population. And then we have this population that were retired from the labor market. However, they didn't receive any pension. And then in the last part in the right and the bottom part is inactivity to pension. So they come from the inactivity to a pension. We have many people that come from this scheme because they have to receive a pension. And this description gives us information in general terms how the population in Mexico is described. However, we have another model that can allow us how to explain why people belongs to a group to another. So with this model, I just suggest a multinomial logistic regression model that review the different models or the excluding models if you belong to cluster number 1 or cluster number 2, cluster number 3 or 4. So the model that fits the most is a multimonial logistic model. And then we will have the results I will present as follows. So what we can see here in this chart are the probabilities of each of the groups in general terms. So if you can see here that this value is greater than 1, we will have the great probability to belong to this kind of group. When we have a lower number 1, is that there is a probability to belong to this group. So we have variable 6. And this is very important because it's a consequence of the building of the linkage. However, 6 of variable didn't allow me to mix by people because they want to analog because every one of them have a pension. However, I cannot differentiate if the pension is from one person or to another according to their sex. So what we can observe here is that only sex variable is significant to belong to the retirement or without pension group, or for the active population. So remember that with these categories, we will have a reference element. So all these variables will be interpreted according to our reference variable. So let me just provide you the example one step by step. So we will have a lower probability to retire without pension in comparison to continue with activity. So men will continue with activity and they are not being able to retire without a pension. So of course, in this case, the construction of the link didn't allow me to make both predictions. However, what we will have according to the literature says that if they are female, they will have the access to receive a pension because of course, this pension is being built in the household, so we cannot analog this part. So now this is consistent with all the literature that we have been reviewed. And actually we have here some other options that will increase the possibilities to receive a pension. Or also they will have the possibilities to be retired by the regular pension scheme or just to have a pension or in comparison on having an activity. So it's more easier to be retired with a pension without an activity that you have an activity. So we are observing that in those locations in which we have greater elderly people, is easier for them to be retired. So if we have higher population, they might have a better access to formal labor or some other services. And I will just to address the access to healthy or to an own business. So actually to have an own business, this is not an informality, but also give you the opportunity to be retired in some other years. So this is the variable, the most significant variable. However, by reviewing literature, they signal this or locate this. So a person of over 65 years, they will come to be the health variable, one of their priorities. So remember that the Social Security not only covers the degenerative diseases or mobility. So if a person doesn't have guaranteed health care, they will not decide to be pensioned. So for the more than 75 years old population, it is not the same for the population they have a 30 years old versus the person that have more over than 75 years old. So with this, I just conclude with this, and I would like just to explain the following slide, because sometimes it's very difficult to interpret the slots or the clusters. And with this, I just conclude my participation, and then we will continue with the comments. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
¿Se cortó la transmisión? Ay, sí. Bueno, A continuación, vamos a tener los comentarios
Now
de...
we will have the comments by Daniela Alejandra Ramirez by the Autonomous National University, Mexico. She is the author by the Science Faculty of UNAM. Now she has been working in the supervision and risk analysis for financings and experience in Social Security and improvement of actuarial evaluations in the Social Security Institute for the Military Forces and the Treasury organization. She has been working with the ILO as external advisor for the Social Security. And also she has some experience as a Mexican Autonomous University from 2012 for both the Faculty of Science and the Faculty of Economy by providing the subjects in Social Security and quantitative topics in finances. Thank you very much and welcome, dear Daniela. Thank you very much for joining us today. I will give the floor for you. Thank you very much for this invitation, and thank you very much, Dr. Carlos, for sharing your article. Was very interesting and the results as well. So I think that this topic or pension topic is a very important topic. However, it's important to analyze the context and the main situation. So the situation of pensions can be focused on the current situation. The first factor that affects the possibility of people to have a pension is their formal employment. So we have mentioned some data in the article. However, I would like to mention that in Mexico, we have more than 128 million, and the population returns 59%, in which the 54% are in the informal sector. So all these people are not providing or contributing to have an elderly pension, but they don't have any access for maternity or disability, or for old people or for their widows. And this is a very important topic because old people don't have the protection by Social Security. However, this is a human right, so everyone will have the right for this protection. And we have also previously mentioned about the demographic bonus, which is a process or demographic transition. Nowadays in Mexico, we are just having more information about the demographic population. And we can talk about the demographic bonus in which we diminish the proportion of children, and actually we are increasing all the economically active population is increasing. And actually this population can be leveraged just to contribute to the growing of the country. And this demographic bonus can be leveraged as well for the pension system. However, this is complex because the current work situation has not allowed to do so. Something which is important is that currently the population, the young population, don't have the interest to work. They have the interest, but most of the time they mention, okay, no, I don't want to work. I just want to be a YouTuber or just to be a something else. So actually they use a lot of technology and some other technological resources. So they look for some other work alternatives. And this influences the possibility in the future to have a good pension. And actually, these are different topics that they are not interested in, so they don't have any knowledge on that. And actually, I can discuss it with my classmates. They don't know actually that they have the opportunity to have their retirement or pension. They don't have any knowledge on this matter. So it's very important to educate the young population that they have the right and they have just to take care of their future. So this demographic bonus avoid to leverage this. So, however, we don't have enough infants or children population. All those resources addressed for that population are addressed to take care for the elderly people because they don't have enough resources to maintain themselves. Because most of them, they have degenerative diseases, or because they don't have enough resources to face those illnesses or diseases. So their families should take care of them now. And this also avoids this young population in economically active are not able to have this kind of pensions or systems. And these are certain topics that should keep in constant update because this population will be the one that in the future will require a old age pension. And now the Social Security only provides us with our individual account. So of course, these retirement are not adequate, and also we have a great turnover in the young population. And they cannot be retiring at 65 years old, so they have to work more. And also we should take certain or just to take measures to provide this access to the different benefits. And finally, I want to recall you that individual savings, it is not the only tool or instrument for us to have a old age pension. So this financing modality is also very important. We have the escalonated prime. So there are some other methods that have to be correctly used to be to have resume them in terms of social. So the pensions that are being providing are not based on a safety or insurance. However, they have to be part of the individual saving. So it's important just to provide this access to different people. And so they have the access to these benefits. Thank you very much. So this is all for my presentation. Thank you very much, Daniela.
Vamos perfecto en el tiempo. Qué bien, muchísimas gracias. Muchas gracias, Daniela. Bueno, a continuación tendremos el
Okay, now we will continue with Mr. Carlos Contreras Cruz. He is the actuary of the CISS. He was a former student of the Mexican Autonomous Institute by the Social Security Systems by the University of Alcalá in Spain and corporate finances master in Anahuac University, Mexico. He holds more than 20 years of experience as lecturer and as a trainer for the human capital in the Autonomous University of Puebla in Colombia and the Central University in Venezuela and the ILO. He has provided a lot of consultancy in Social Security topics to different universities in his country and internationally. And such as the administrator for the occupational risk, for the Social Provision Institute of Paraguay, and some other instances in Mexico. And he has also written different books, and actually we are very grateful for having him here in the Inter-American Conference. Thank you very much, Mr. Actuary. Thank you very much, Ms. Vanessa and Mr. Carlos. Congratulations for this paper. I would like to begin with a questions due to the results that are presented in this paper. Is there any relationship with the welfare or well-being pension fund? And I'm asking this because when we created the first initiative that also was approved, the second one, it was established that people will be able to be pensioned from the 65 years old, and they will have a complementary fund. However, we start talking about the inactive individual accounts. So these inactive accounts for old people that are not were already retired after the 65 years old. So most of the people ask ourselves in why 5 years later of the age of retirement should we have to receive this? And people tend to be pensioned after the age of retirement, and particularly they are effective if they continue in the labor market and if they pension after. So is there any other progress on this as we mentioned previously? So if someone have already asked themselves, okay, so what is happening in those 5 years? Because after the 65 years old retirement, what will happen? So I'm very curious because even though we have different constituencies and many research on these topics, we have to talk about this later on as well. And I want just to share with you an actuary experience because many few years ago when I still studying. So when we studied about the collective insurance, they taught us the actuary technique because we only have to take one representative person from the group. So then this actuary technique evolved, and due to the technologies or some other mathematical upgrades, we can make an analysis of greater strength. So when we made those analyses, we discovered that we can have similar data when we represent, and we have a similar representative of a group. There is a not, some people mention that, okay, this technique is very old. And when we see these results, of course, we don't have to eliminate or just to avoid this technique because it was a reason why we thought this method actually. So, and finally, I think that this study should be an asset for the following research, for the team for the conference or for the CISS, because in this last chart that you showed us, we saw different variables, the sex, education, healthcare attention, and most of the people have asked themselves that it is evident that thank you to the healthcare service, people live more. And this is a logic, but if we demonstrate a quantitative system, we can see here that this is important asset to continue working on some other research, particularly on the gender topic, because actually we have been talking about these topics before in the conference. So I will invite all the staff here in the conference just to take this as an asset so we can continue working in some other research in more detail. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much, Dr. Carlos.
Muchas gracias, Carlos. Y bueno, por último tenemos a
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos. And finally, we will have our last commentarist, who is online. And we have a Jose Luis Clavelina, he is Director of Economics by the Mexican University of the same university, and he has a scholarship as PhD scholarship and in Canada, and he has been experienced as the studies president in the deputy chamber. He takes part of the Research National System, and he currently coordinates the Economical Specialization Institute in UNAM, and he is director of the research on the Economical Assay Institute. Within his interest, they have the sustainability of public finances and international financing and the development for financing for the development. Thank you very much for joining us today, Mr. Jose Luis. I will give the floor for you. Thank you very much for the presentation. And also, I would like to thank the Inter-American Conference for Social Security Studies and the organizers, and mainly Mr. Miguel Ángel Carlos Vélez, to present this article. And actually, I think that this is a great topic, and this is a solid topic. And with a description and the characteristics of the people that will have the possibility to receive a pension. And he presented relevant information for the elaboration and preparation of public policies that can address some of the problems that are already identified. Some other problems that have not been able to be addressed in decades, as informality that characterize the Mexican economics, and the lower salaries that can affect the development of employees, and finally, that will avoid them to be pensioned. And actually, this research explained the existence of the different pension systems by describing, for example, the inconsistency of the temporary of the elderly people, or the generation change, or certain Actually, this thing can just elevate the economical expense for all those people that have lower income or because the ones that are not able to save. And I think that is very, very interesting. And I would like to highlight that this document considers all pension systems or pensioners as dynamic mechanisms that can be adaptable to the reality of the economy and the demographic changes. And also, it describes the characteristics of the system that we have been observed over the time, and also their advantages and disadvantages. I talk about the pay-as-you-go scheme, and mainly for the tax system that are faced by the different transitional generation due to the automatic balance that we can face here in the country, and also by the non-contributory systems on the fiscal risk that represents on the elderly or the old age process for the population. As it was mentioned already, they mentioned relevant things in terms of gender, and such as how the women has better access to the different pension systems or the systems in general. And I think that these results are relevant because after the 55 years old, a worker should continue working 5 more years in their activity, and then they will get a pension in around 75 years old. And how people will finance this in the last 5 years? And what's happening with these people? And actually, this is very important to know because we should identify first these problems and how all these things or many policies should be considered to address these policies. Both for administrative issues may have a great impact on this population group. And I think that this article or this paper can emphasize what kind of policies will help us out to address this problematic. Actually, we identify some of them. The ones that come from the education, with greater education, we will have a more voluntary employment based on Social Security. Because in the country, we have a fragmented Social Security system and also for the pensions, because the most important systems are IMSS and ISTE. However, we have a different systems in Pemex or the military forces. They have their own processes, or the judicial power, the judicial branch, or some other state institutions. They have different services or systems. From the reform of 1997, we have a different challenges and differences by the formal workers by a system that are questionable and they require to be updated. So if we see the CONSAR informal report, we can see here that the Afores represented 90% of the PIB, and also they have the more than 70% of the assets of the market. And the half of the resources are invested in public debt, the 30% of national values, but in this 32%, the 1.7% correspond to all the productive institutions of the state, and some other percentage of the resourcing bank. And of course, we are concentrated in the public debt, which appear in the indicators. And of course, with a rentability, very low rentability on around 55%. So if we consider the last 10 years, the information of the CONSAR, or based on the information of the CONSAR, we have only the 63%, and we have a negative rentability of 55%. So actually, we are facing a fragmented system with lower performance in the system. We also have made some other modifications in these last 6 years. According to CONSAR, from January to March, 63 people were retired. The 93% were able to be retired due to the guarantee pension. And for the 68 million people, or 92 people were able to do so by buying annually rentability. If the reform of 2020 was not being created, less people will be retired. However, this a pension guarantee of the workers is also being considered. So for 2024, in between non-contributory contributory pensions, we will have almost 22% of the budget. So we are becoming a country that pay pensions and debts. And actually, we are paying half of our budget in all these two aspects. So we have to continue with this aspect in which most of the budget are part or responsible for the employees and employers. And most of them, they ended up in the pay on the different inflation or different instruments for the rates in which they invest their savings. So I think that we should continue thinking about this system as a dynamic system that can be able to change, or to think in this non-contributory system that can be an instrument that have the possibility to change into a system or a strengthened system, so if we don't consider the main consequences that we are facing nowadays. So each of us, the reality is that each of us will be facing the reality. So we are the society that has to live between two pension different systems. And if we don't have enough financing, it will be very complex to change it. So as a society, we have decided not to elevate the taxes. So actually, in this electoral year, we were able just to finance or just to cover different debts, but we have to make different tax or fiscal updates in our reforms that can modify key variables in the system, such as salaries or quotation rates, among others. So I think that we still have time to continue working on that. We don't have enough time to do so. But thank you very much for having me here today.
Gracias, doctor José Luis. Y bueno,
Thank you, Dr. Jose Luis. And after these comments, I want to ask Mr. Carlos if he wants to conclude, and then we will continue with the Q&A session by the public. If you have any questions, please let us know in the chat box in the platform. Thank you very much. And before we can pass, or we can continue with the questions, or just to comment on Mr. Carlos and Jose Luis and Daniela, thank you very much for your time. I would like to mention that I agree with Daniela on the lack of knowledge of these new generations on the pension systems, because I think that this is very important, that cannot be underestimated. On the one hand, we have these pension systems or schemes that are not being useful for all of us if we don't have enough knowledge on that. And actually, there is an important element here, which is the surveillance. So the transparency systems work if we have this surveillance or active surveillance. So by all the regulatory institutions, but also for all those people that are responsible to review their accounts or just to choose the best pension system. If they don't see or they don't evaluate these old things, of course, things cannot be worked optimally. And the other aspect that is very important as well is the formal work. So something which is very important is that people are just taking longer to be part of the work market. And on the one hand, the first consequence is the education. However, On average, the people take different times or free times. So with this behavior, we can compare it, and actually we can see here that the age of work have been diminished. So of course they are able to pay for the benefits or contributions, or they are able to save a lot. Another aspect I want to mention that Carlos previously commented, and the question is if there are a relationship between the pension system. Actually, the literature that I just, or the information that I get from the SN was for the literature of this work data, because of course within my model there is not these variables to address this topic. However, his observation is really good. This is an aspect that we should consider for the following research, and I will relate this with the following question. So this study should be useful for the next research here in the CS or in the CISS or some other institutions. But I think that this kind of informational model can be part of a huge project. So I have notified this for Mexico, but Mexico is not the only country that has this longitudinal information or research. However, Uruguay, Panama, Chile, some other countries can be replicated to the most of the countries in the Americas. So in this case, we'll be able to find very interesting results or outcome. So actually, I agree that we have to include this information on these projects to some other projects in some other institutions. Now, according to Mr. Jose Luis' comments, I think that there is a very useful element, is the fragmentation between the pension systems. Because at the end of the day, many pension systems have relationship between each other. And this made it difficult to evaluate all this information that they receive. And this process have two options. And the first one is the information that they receive, and the second one is the investment or the inversions. Because just remember that the individual saving have more interest. So if as individual I have a greater money, or when we have a greater possibility to save, we will have different systems to choose. So we will have greater or lower money, so we can just invest in contrast for the interest that can be generated. And some other points that is very crucial as well is that who will finance or who will cover these financing needs to cover for the people that need their retirement pension. So this will be mixed for one aspect. For all people that seek to be retired is all those people that are over 65 years old. So we can see here that a person will take longer to get retired. However, these older people will have the tendency to have greater degenerative disabilities or some other consequences. And all those elements make it complex to address the problem. So of course, we will have people that are not able to retire from the labor market because they have to continue working, because they don't have any right to any Social Security benefits. And this has to do with informality in the region, or due to the high rates of informality, or the lack of possibilities for people to save for their future. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Carlos. Okay, so we have a Q&A session for the public. So if you want to ask some questions through the Zoom chat box, please let us know and we can just answer all the questions. So anyone here in the room wants to make or to ask any question?
Pregunta como tal, no, porque porque no soy especialista, más bien podría hacer algún comentario. Sí.
I don't have any question, but I would like to comment something.
Entrada, felicidades, ¿no? Por esta
First of all, congratulations for this presentation and nice to meet you, Carlos.
Me llama mucho la atención el tema que se mencionó.
I was very interested in this topic
Los cambios generacionales,
on the generational changes, on how the new generations are trying to understand this labor market insertion differently. And I think that actually we have the situation that the person or the individual should be educated on how the pension systems or the social security systems works. So we all have to be responsible to the certain time to have this information to make a decision. And actually, according to this information, they will be able to decide their step number A, step B, or step C. However, you also mentioned that pension social security is a human right. So what can we do for the social security systems? What can we do for all individuals can be educated on the new systems already applicable? Because, for example, we can just facing people that are not able or they don't want to work more than 8 hours. And this is not because they don't want to work, but this is a new generation that understand that there are some other ways to balance their personal life with labor life or with the social life. So how can we do that these systems can be also educated and just take different actions against a new social reality? Thank you very much. So do you have any other answer or just... Yes, actually, I totally agree with Vero because both systems should be adaptable to the reality. So the individual should be educated and also all the systems should be educated as well in both realities. Okay, if anyone else have any questions, so let's continue with my questions. So the sensibilization calculated for the taxes. Yes, actually, first of all, we evaluated that it was not biases. So the distribution should be the same. And then if they were estimated when they have variable estimations, they should be similar. Because when we eliminate variables, we can have all variables that don't have representative because they have less options. So we have a question that generates 15 or 16 questions or answers. Of course, it will be considered significantly. And then I work with complex tests because as we use different models, we cannot use expansive models. So I use complex models, and with that, we can just continue working on that. So we have another question here. So they mentioned that, could you please clarify your probabilities in your chart? I understand that probabilities are between 1 and 0 and 1, and we talk about values of higher 1. So could you please help us out on sharing the screen again so Mr. Carlos can explain it to the audience? Okay, go ahead. I think that is almost the last slide.
Más adelante el último. Penúltima. Más. Donde era el cuadro.
El cuadro. No dice salud 21.
Ahí.
Eso me dije. Ahí está, gracias.
Ok, sí, claro, lo que menciona es muy cierto. Estas no son probabilidades.
Yes,
estos son-
actually, these are not probabilities. These are the odds.
Lo que menciona es cierto, estas no son probabilidades.
So these are not probabilities. So when I talk about probabilities, let's continue with the next chart. Is just to transform these odds into probabilities between 0 and 1.
No, pero bueno, es punto, bueno, 0.
But it's 0.2, 0.6, etc. So those are the probabilities in which they have considered the odds. So these are the multimodal radios. So are you able to share this information, this slide with us? Well, actually, we are recording this transmission. So for all those that are listening to us or visualizing this presentation, you will have this information available in the platforms. Yes, actually, I can share my presentation with you if you want. So one more question. What will happen with people over 65 years old? I understand they are not within the B study group, but let's say that people of 55 years old, they are still the 73 generation, more or less. So what will happen with people that are, as Daniela mentioned, a 40 generation? So let's say that we cannot apply these old results on the future for population. So what would suggest? Yes, actually, we cannot observe the population less 55 years old. But of course, we have to wait to continue replicating this or just to use some other database to continue observing this population. Actually, we have different databases or microdata in which we can just evaluate or just to apply this method. So these results apply only for the 73 generation, right? Yes, actually, we cannot mix all the results for the people that we didn't observe. Yes, actually, we have to do some other research. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Carlos, for your paper. Thank you very much, Ms. Daniela, Carlos, and Mr. Jose. Thank you very much for joining us today in this session and for all the audience. We will giving you your diplomas for participation, and this will be sent to you electronically. And thank you very much on behalf of the Inter-American Conference for being here with us and to learn about our colleagues' work. And thank you very much, everyone that are joining us today here in the camera. Thank you very much for all the simultaneous interpretation people and all the people in charge of the cameras and all the staff in the CISS and the CS. Thank you very much again. And please follow us in our networks. Any final comment? Okay. Thank you very much. And let's continue or let's sit together in the next session. Thank you very much.
Estuvo bien, mira, 10